All right, how are we doing today? Let's give a hand for everybody that's gone up today. Let's do that first. Oh yeah. Had amazing guests today, and now we have another amazing guest, Dan Hale. I'll let you start off by telling us who you are, a little bit how you got into the space, and what you're up to now.
Cool. Well, thanks for having me, everyone. I've been in Bitcoin about 10 years. Worked at a bunch of different companies, including like blockchain.com. I currently work at Kraken as Director of Growth Marketing. And yeah, it's been a wild journey. 10 years is a long time. There's, the original conferences back in 2013, the San Jose Bitcoin conference, the entire conference was like half the size of this room. It was tiny. So to see like Bitcoin 2022 and to see this is pretty incredible.
Oh yeah, the growth is amazing, especially over the last decade. And a lot of talk about the industry, Bitcoin, DeFi, NFTs. We can go into every different facet you want, but we have to understand first what DeFi is specifically, because people have different definitions. So walk us through what DeFi is and how we can define it.
Yeah, so DeFi is probably the most overly used term in the crypto space, where it basically means anything you want it to be. DeFi stands for decentralized finance, but what things are decentralized, or to what degree are they decentralized, is really subjective. So I would say like DeFi to me is to such a degree that it's decentralized and there's finance on a blockchain. That's DeFi in a way. But yeah, it's super subjective. A lot of different people have different opinions on what DeFi represents. And so yeah, I would say roughly it's like decentralized finance, decentralized to a very good degree on a blockchain.
Oh yeah. So what is your definition of DeFi that you would prefer people would use as far as their outlook on the industry?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, that line of decentralization, I would say that my level of decentralization would be like the Bitcoin blockchain. The Bitcoin blockchain, the governance behind it, how the proof of work mechanism functions, all of these things I think represent a truly decentralized currency. And so for me, that's why I like DeFi on Bitcoin, because of this. Oh, yeah. Because it has that robust base. It is the most decentralized project out there. So that's my line, but most people would be okay with the line going the other direction.
Oh yeah, so take us back to the scary days of Bitcoin, and maybe even a little bit before, of how DeFi got started, and where the term came from, who were some of the early people to work on it.
Yeah, so why was Bitcoin created? Bitcoin was created and planted in the middle of the 2008 financial crisis. It was an antidote for trust. It was an antidote to poor central banking policy, of poor banks managing their assets in a poor manner. And so Satoshi built Bitcoin to be this new money where we didn't have to have trust with our money anymore. And so with that, I think Bitcoin was this solution to this trust problem. And so that was the first sort of part. That was the first DeFi project out there, is Bitcoin. Bitcoin itself is DeFi, and so from there is really amazing to see how far it's grown. But yeah, it's definitely Bitcoin, I would say, is the first DeFi project.
Oh yeah, yes. And what are some of the utilities for DeFi from back then that people had that we can use today? What are some of those newer utilities that we may be able to use?
Yeah, so if we want to talk about some basic DeFi functionality, technically a smart contract is DeFi. So smart contracts, everyone knows, is DeFi, but technically like multi-sig is DeFi as well. A multi-signature arrangement where multiple people hold shards of a private key, that's a governance mechanism, and that can interact with the protocol in a certain way. So that's very basic primitives, and Bitcoin has had that for a long time, I think since inception. There's other things as well, like for example with coin joins and join market. That's one of the first ways to earn a DeFi yield, and that occurred on Bitcoin as well. You've also got other things too, like people forget that NFTs started on Bitcoin back with Counterparty, and what were they, Rare Pepes?
Yeah, Rare Pepes, back in 2014?
Yeah, super long time ago. So there's been a lot of different Bitcoin DeFi, Bitcoin DeFi functionality. But when we compare it to other blockchains though, Bitcoin definitely doesn't have as much expressivity. Like you can't express as many different smart contract types. You can't do as much with it as some of these other chains. But that's usually for good reason, because Bitcoin doesn't want to trade off some of that decentralization for more throughput or more advanced smart contracting.
Oh yeah, so talk about that a little bit. The difference between Bitcoin DeFi and other chains DeFi. What are some of those trade-offs, and what should people look for when they're using maybe other chains?
Yeah, so Bitcoin DeFi is all about, Bitcoin network's not going to change. The base Bitcoin layer is meant to be super robust, sound, and change very little. That builds trust over time as people choose to store value in the Bitcoin blockchain. Because if you change the chain all the time, or you change the issuance, like for example with Ethereum, then that goes down the road of these changes compound complexity, and they can lead to situations where, for example, we've seen all those different DeFi hacks that have occurred. These are pretty prevalent.
Oh, yeah. We'll get into that.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a minute. But Bitcoin is that solid foundation in which you would want to build on top of. But it's definitely, when we look at the expressiveness, Bitcoin is built to be a money. And so when we think, I come from a tech background, and so when you build a product, you build it to do one thing really well. You don't build it to do all the things super well. So Bitcoin is built to be a really good money. And the DeFi component is usually built with things like Lightning, or you've got like multi-sig or stacks. These are all different ways to add smart contract functionality on top of Bitcoin rather than into the core Bitcoin protocol.
Yes, and you mentioned smart contracts, so let's go ahead and speak about it. We have seen a lot of smart contract hacks over the past few years. What are some of the things people can do to mitigate that risk and maybe improve the smart contract industry?
Yeah, so the caveat, I'm not a programmer, so I'm not going to be able to give you some good insight into how to keep things secure. But what most of these companies do, or these projects do, is they have auditors. So they run a script, audit the blockchain, and look at this smart contract and how it runs, and it looks for any exploits. So that's pretty common practice. There's also things too where there's all sorts of mitigation strategies where they're able to mitigate, the control of the treasury or whatever this, if there's so many different varieties of DeFi stuff that it's kind of tough to cover all of them. But there's other ways too where you have a multi-signature arrangement, and you have that properly assigned to as many different participants as you can. There was a recent DeFi hack where they had a multi-sig arrangement, but one person had 5 out of 8 keys. So it didn't really make any sense. Yeah, so just basics, basic private key management, auditing, and yeah, I think that's probably a good foundation.
Oh yeah, and I honestly think with some of these smart contract exploits, we're starting to see people get greedy and maybe take it from their own people. Do you think that is a problem as well? People coming in, promising the world, and then later rug pulling them.
Yes, the infamous term rug pull.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think with any of these projects, you should look at the founders. You should look at the founders, their backgrounds, what they've done before. I think if you trust some random individuals from Russia, then it's probably not going to go well. So I think that a lot of people want to get into these projects to make money really quick. Just know that you're gonna have plenty of time to make money. You should just zoom out, focus on the fundamentals, and really dig in. And of course, for me, I think Bitcoin is the best project out there. So that's what I think is your best bet long term to hold. But certainly a lot of people like to move money around these different DeFi platforms, and of course people like to do yield farming, which is really cool. But yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. And since Bitcoin is the most secure blockchain, what are some of the DeFi products on Bitcoin right now, outside of stacks, that we may be able to utilize as well?
Yeah, so Lightning. Lightning's a classic one. Lightning enables people to pay with Bitcoin, and it makes the transaction instantaneous and have super low fees. So that's really critical, and I think that was a huge fundamental leap. That wasn't developed, I believe it was written back in 2014, 2015, but wasn't commercialized until I think 2017, 2018. And so Lightning, I think, is probably the most widely used Bitcoin DeFi product today. Right. So I would consider that Bitcoin DeFi. It's a very simple DeFi product. And join market. That's probably the most used DeFi product on Bitcoin as well. It's you get incentivized to do coin joins. And let's see. We've got. I think there's another one coming out using. There's a new project coming out. I forget. They're doing options on Bitcoin. Let's see. They're using. It's a new functionality. I forget. I'm blanking out. But yeah, there's a lot of different, a lot of cool projects on top of Bitcoin that are doing Bitcoin DeFi-esque things.
Oh yeah, doing options on top of it, and then also we saw today actually the announcement of a $70 million investment into Lightning.
Right.
For stablecoins. So we're getting another layer there. How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, that's super cool. I'm a huge fan of Elizabeth Stark. She's awesome. She's been a great operator, a great advocate for Bitcoin. And really excited to see her company lean into that, lean into Lightning and develop more use cases. I'm not sure with how that one works. I don't know if you looked at that. I haven't read into the press release yet.
Oh yeah.
But it looks pretty cool. So they essentially want to bring like stable coins, so an asset that is somewhat pegged to the dollar's value. They want to bring that on top of Lightning, so you could transact using dollars on top of the Bitcoin network. People forget that Tether used to be on Bitcoin.
Yeah.
USDT used to be on Bitcoin, and so yeah, this is kind of bringing back that, with these stable coins, bringing those onto the Bitcoin blockchain, and there's a lot of cool things you can do with that.
Oh yeah. So one thing I always have to address the elephant in the room. Whenever we have these talks, regulators. We have regulation; it exists. How do you think DeFi can either interact with regulation or get rid of some of the stringent regulation we have now?
Well, I'm looking out for the Kraken's comms team. I'm going to get in trouble if I say
Who's
anything.
the Fed? Raise your hand.
So, at Kraken, of course, we want to stay regulatory compliant.
Right.
So we make sure we've got a legion of attorneys to make sure that we do everything properly. With DeFi, these rules are enforced on chain. These aren't necessarily laws.
Right.
These are just smart contracts, and they're doing whatever they like. So I think, with DeFi and regulations, I think the regulators will have to look at DeFi and come to a conclusion of like, well, what can we really regulate here? Which
right.
I'm not sure, you can't enforce the regulation. Of course, they could go after some weak points, being like the project founders. For example, I think the SEC has talked about that a little bit. Like if you build some of these things, they've hinted that they might go after you for that. So I think that, the weak points are always the humans in the loop, but yeah, smart contracts themselves, and the whole purpose of a blockchain is that it's immutable and you can't censor it, and no one has control over it. So, you can have regulations in the real world, but on that chain they can do whatever they like.
Oh yeah. Would you like to see regulators start to ease up on that, as far as we want to regulate it somehow? Because they could have a separate sandbox where you just let it flourish and then see what happens.
I mean, I'm a libertarian, so obviously less regulations would be better. I believe in people's the free ability to do what you want with your money and do what you want with your body. So for me, of course, I'd love a less restrictive system.
Oh yes, and internationally speaking, do you think other countries that they're taking DeFi serious and that they're starting to use it more?
Yeah, I think the UK just hired someone to be like the chief crypto person, something like that.
Officer,
yeah, I think governments across the world are going to realize we can lean into this or we can fight it. And I think leaning into it is much more lucrative. You can also tax the people that use crypto, right? So that's more tax income for the. So there's a financial incentive not to be too restrictive and ban it. So I think I see them leaning in probably more than I see them banning it. But yeah, the UK, of course, El Salvador. Bukele is a huge advocate of Bitcoin. And cities. Mayor Suarez in Miami is a huge fan of Bitcoin.
Oh yeah.
And really cool to see what he's been doing with Bitcoin, city coins, and stacks.
Oh yeah. And yes, Bitcoin, stacks, he's doing a lot of things here. And I would love to see more of a DeFi platform that could be used maybe here or pushed out, so maybe we'll see. So long term, where do you see DeFi going, and what will it take to get to that point?
Yeah. So people think about DeFi consuming all of finance, and that's certainly possible, but for example, we can't put the title of a house on the blockchain, because how would you go enforce that? Governments will still have some control over the real physical world. Only the digitally native assets like Bitcoin or Ethereum can exist in a way that's censorship free. If you put a title on the blockchain or a bond on the blockchain, well, the company has to pay that bond. There's all sorts of different things that are a little bit tricky, where DeFi is not going to eat everything, because there's just too much real world connectivity to a physical building, to a physical company, to physical people, versus native assets that are unseizable and uncensorable. So, let's clarify that first, is that DeFi is not going to eat everything. There's still going to be an existing TradFi system. As much as we don't like that, some of that's still going to exist. But we're going to see a lot more flow into the DeFi ecosystem in terms of, I would say, like going margin. I think that's a really popular way to use crypto. So for example, let's say you've got $1 million of Bitcoin and you want to go buy a house, but you don't want to sell your Bitcoin. You can borrow dollars against your Bitcoin using your Bitcoin as collateral. So I think stuff like that's really cool. Earning a yield, with like lending out your Bitcoin and earning a yield on it. I think some of those are like good foundational elements that'll be there long term. And then I think what's really interesting, I'm a Bitcoin fan. I'm more just into Bitcoin, but it is interesting. I do observe, these other protocols and these other tokens and what they do.
Right.
And it is interesting seeing these tokens being used as an incentive mechanism and these communities and DAOs being built up. So I do think that'll be interesting to watch in terms of seeing how DAOs are created and how these DAOs can get a group of people around a different topic and harness them and harness that potential and point that towards building something.
Oh.
So I think in the future, DAOs, by the way, DAOs were talked about in the Bitcoin Talk forums back in like 2011.
Oh yeah, nothing's new in this industry.
Nothing's new.
It's all just coming back. I just had to wait.
A lot of this stuff has been thought of before. So I think DAOs are really interesting because these decentralized autonomous organizations allow people to move capital around in a way that's it's like a new type of business entity. You have like I believe a corporation was only created. The corporation was created in like 1600.
Oh yeah.
So the idea of a corporation has existed for a long time. Like the modern corporation or the modern organizational type structures for businesses are pretty new. So I think it'll be interesting to see what those can do.
Oh yeah, yes, and DAOs have been mentioned a lot, over the past few years. People starting to get into these groups, able to use it. And one thing I would like for you to explain is, what type of DAO or what type of DeFi project would you like to see? If there was a perfect one, everything by the book, exactly how you would like, what would Dan Hill like to see in a DeFi project?
That's a great question. I haven't really thought about that. For me, obviously, I think I'm a big fan of SpaceX and what Elon Musk is doing.
Right.
He's commented on how on Mars he doesn't recognize the legitimacy of any other government, which I think is fantastic. so because it's a whole new planet.
DeFi on Mars.
DeFi on Mars. So maybe like a DAO or an organizational structure where people could, I don't know, whether it be like voting or, there's also some issues as well. I forget who wrote it, but someone wrote about how does Bitcoin scale to the universe.
Right.
And so due to the speed of light problem, you can't really sync with these other blockchains, and so you actually might have to create, or there's ways to use Bitcoin within the solar system, but there's all sorts of weird delays that occur with that. So seeing like a DAO with Mars or something like that would be super interesting.
Oh, yeah.
This is getting pretty out there, but that's...
Oh yeah, we can go way out there.
It's getting pretty weird. Yeah.
Oh yeah, some people say Satoshi's an alien. Why not? Let's just take it out of space. Because I think the use case on Earth is okay, but the outer space use case is even bigger, right?
To the moon.
To the moon, right? And speaking of as far as the future goes, one thing I think people have concerns about with DeFi is that it becomes too centralized, or that it's becoming too centralized. I've tried to say the term CDeFi. It's not really DeFi. So do you think companies that are like that should put out that they're not DeFi, not put it on their website, or should they say it's on a scale of decentralization? What do you think?
Well, I'm a marketer, so it's pretty hard to have a succinct message that we're like, hey, we're this amount of decentralized versus saying we're DeFi.
Right.
So I think DeFi is kind of used like the term blockchain very liberally when it may or may not actually be a blockchain or DeFi. I think that there is a lot of dangerous centralization that is occurring in DeFi. For example, USDT and USDC. Those are two stable coins that are often used used as collateral in smart contracts, but they're both completely centralized. They can be frozen, reversed, or canceled completely in a moment's notice.
Right.
And the total value of all the USDC, I think, is 60 billion.
Yep.
So this is a lot of collateral. So the DeFi ecosystem, I think, has some elements of very dangerous decentralization where everything will look like it's doing fine until it isn't. Yeah, so this is why I care so much about decentralization and why I like Bitcoin so much is the Bitcoin community cares about this a lot. And I think we're all fans of like stable coins. I think they're a really cool innovation, but these ones that are centrally controlled are pretty dangerous to use as collateral.
Right. Oh yeah, and I think people need to understand the risk of centralization, that it can be cut off. And we've seen that with the dollar, with fiat currency in certain areas, Canada, other places like that. We've seen capital control. So let's get into that a little bit because it does interact geopolitically. We have donations in stable coins, donations in crypto. Those things can be cut off. What types of ways do you think we can get around that with governments?
Yeah, I mean, so stable coins are often used in countries like Argentina, and because, for example, I believe in Bitcoin, but it is volatile, so I understand when people don't want to hold that directly, and also people are more familiar with the dollar, so it's a little bit more comfortable.
Right.
So I think when we look at the utilization of Tether or USDC or Bitcoin, Alex Gladstein, a good buddy of mine, he's with the Human Rights Foundation.
Yep. Shout out to Alex.
Yeah, Alex is awesome.
Okay.
Fun fact, we were just in Puebla, Mexico with Ricardo Salinas.
Oh, yeah.
He's the third wealthiest Mexican. And we met Neil deGrasse Tyson at his conference, and we tried to orange pill him. So it was me, him, and Saifedean who tried to orange pill him.
Did you do it?
Well, he was pretty curious.
Oh, man. I'm sure you asked a lot of questions.
He asked a lot of questions. He was open-minded. But it was interesting seeing all three of us try our best pitches. It was a very funny moment. But anyways, Alex is great. And Alex is a huge advocate of freedom, and Human Rights Foundation supports freedom.
Right.
And so with the Human Rights Foundation, Alex discovered Bitcoin, I think about 5-6 years ago, and became a really big voice in the Bitcoin community, talking about why Bitcoin is a freedom tool. And so he also thinks that like Tether and these stable coins are a freedom tool as well. And I agree. Ideally they would be less centralized, but if people can use them to move funds from one place to another quickly and they don't need to hold wealth in it, then that's a pretty good utility.
Right. And like you said, freedom, but freedom isn't free, right? So
Totally.
We have the ability now to move capital how we want, but do you agree with the fact that every time a coin is flipped with another coin, there's a tax? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, you're talking like when you sell an asset?
Yep, every time. Yeah. Well, anytime you swap an asset, or anytime you sell it, do you agree with that mindset? Because if we're going to decentralize it, how are we going to do that?
I don't like taxes to begin with.
Yeah.
I really don't like taxes.
I understand.
I pay all my taxes, but I really don't like them. The tax situation with crypto is very, very complicated. I wrote an article on this a couple of weeks ago in my newsletter, the Held Report, and essentially you get taxed on a disposition of an asset, so that's a sale. You get taxed in all sorts of different circumstances. When you stake, you get taxed on that. What you earn in yield, that's taxed as income. Same with mining income. You've also got, people forget too, if you contribute capital, and by the way, I'm not a tax CPA, talk to a tax professional, but this is just a good starting point for you to think about it.
Disclaimer.
If you contribute capital to an AMM, like you're a liquidity provider, when you contribute capital, that's a taxable event.
Wow.
People forget that basically everything you touch with this DeFi ecosystem is like a taxable event.
Yes, and I think that's important to put out there because some people just think, well, I just jump on whatever this platform is, swap everything, do 1,000 swaps, and then at the end, then you take it to your accountant and they're pulling their hair out just because they're like, what are you doing, man?
Totally. I mean, I can't imagine what the accountants are going through when people who trade across all these different platforms and they're doing all this crazy stuff. That's why I like to hodl. I've been hodling for 10 years, and for me, you don't pay any taxes when you hodl, and life is a lot less complicated.
Right.
And long term, you're probably not, when you trade back and forth like that, it's really tough to come out in a net positive manner. So yeah, that's why I like hodling.
Oh yeah, likewise. And when you hodl, then you have Bitcoin. You mentioned earlier, you could use it as collateral. I want you to explain that a little more because not only can you use it as collateral for small things, you can also use it for bigger, and then maybe even a bigger use case later, maybe countries could use it. What are some of those use cases you see?
Yeah, so when you use Bitcoin as collateral, let's say you have $1 million of Bitcoin, and like with the example we used earlier, and you want to buy a $500,000 house, you can borrow $500,000, and the counterparty will hold your Bitcoin as collateral, and if the value of your Bitcoin drops to $500,000, they'll sell your Bitcoin to pay for that loan, or you can pay the loan back, which is really cool. Or Bitcoin goes up in value and you don't get margin called, you don't get your collateral liquidated, and the loan becomes a lot cheaper because Bitcoin's value rose much more than the dollar. I think it's a really cool tool that didn't exist until 2018. There weren't many centralized companies, and there weren't DeFi products out there. But for example, you've got a bunch of them in this space. I mean, there's a bunch of different tools out there. For consumers, I think like Coinbase or Unchained Capital are like the two spots. Figure.com, Figure just came out with some pretty cool new products. It's called like the Bitcoin mortgage, and Ledin. Ledin as well is one of those big tools out there you can borrow against your Bitcoin as collateral. The Bitcoin mortgage is a really cool new product where you post Bitcoin as collateral and you have your mortgage. And so what they do is they hold your Bitcoin, and it's not margin callable, so it's not going to be sold if the price dips. And they hold your Bitcoin and they hold your title. And so they give you a mortgage for that. What's cool about that is I don't know if anyone's tried to get a mortgage lately, but if you've got a boatload of crypto and you have no income, I do have income, but let's say you didn't, no one's going to qualify you for a mortgage. So this is a way for those wealthy crypto holders of holding they hold a lot of these assets. They can use that as, for the underwriters to be qualified for the mortgage. Oh, yeah. Because the mortgage company will hold both their crypto and the title. So yeah, I think that the crypto mortgage product is going to be hugely popular. I think it's going to be a super popular product.
Oh yeah, I got to look into that, definitely. My house is here in Miami, so. But I wanted to ask, do you think that would revolutionize the credit system as well? Because our current credit system can be a little bit all over the place. Do you think that having Bitcoin at somewhere in the future will be better than having a quote-unquote credit score?
Well, yeah, I mean, these are collateralized loans, so you already have money because you own the asset.
Right.
Uncollateralized loans will still be, I think, the predominant lending out there because most people need the money because they don't have the money versus having the money and wanting to borrow against it. So I think there's still going to be a need for undercollateralized or non-collateralized loans. The collateralized loans, I think, are really cool. I think long term, we'll probably see the rate of borrow. So right now, borrowing using your Bitcoin as collateral, the borrow rate for dollars is typically between 8 and 12%. That's pretty high. That's a pretty high interest rate. I do think we'll see that start to come down a little bit. I think Figure has it at 6%, but I think that's like a 25% LTV, a loan to value ratio. So you have to post 4 times the amount of collateral for the loan. So that's, not super capital efficient. So yeah, but I do think we'll see that rate start to creep down over time because it's an incredible deal for the person lending dollars to the Bitcoin holder. Oh, yeah. It's an over-collateralized position. You literally can't lose money. I mean, exactly. if Bitcoin drops too much, you just sell it and pays off the loan. So, I could see that interest rate creeping down over time because it's a very safe loan for the lender to underwrite.
Absolutely. And we have a few minutes here left. I wanted to give the crowd a chance to ask Dan any questions. I'm sure you got some questions that are specific to yourself. So if we could, I believe we'll be walking around with the mic. Got it. So if we have any questions, go ahead and raise your hand for Dan. Not all at once.
Everyone's got it all figured out.
Everybody's got it figured out. Oh, I've been right here. All right, yeah, she's on the way.
Always good to see you, Zay. Thank you for your time, Dan. You just had a question in reference to real estate and Bitcoin. My company's working out pathways to tokenize, leveraging stacks. So ultimately, tokenizing real estate on Bitcoin. What are your thoughts in reference to that?
Yeah, I think that's cool. I would wonder if you need a blockchain for that because, if you tokenize that real estate title and all that stuff still exists in the real world. So for example, if you create this product and people can trade it, I'm guessing that's what people would do. If they trade it, they have a claim over the asset, but the blockchain itself is an immutable transaction where the transaction can be sent from between us two and I can't reverse it. But when it comes to real estate, even if that transaction occurs in the real world, we still have to rely on the authorities to give us permission to own that asset. So I think it's interesting. I mean, it's probably more fluid than other mechanisms to trade it back and forth. But yeah, I think it's an interesting idea.
Thanks.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. Any more questions as we wind down here? Amen.
Hey, appreciate you guys. I know Kraken is doing a lot. They've just released Lightning, be able to use. Seeing this as stacks, I'm not the most familiar with Kraken. Is there any plans to maybe integrate stacks or maybe do the Bitcoin yield through stacks like OKCoin and some of the other ones? Or is that some information you can let us know about? Maybe
yeah, that's a great question. So Kraken has a big staking part of our business. So you can stake a lot of different crypto assets. So that's a huge part of our business. It's doing fantastic. I can't comment on new coins that we're going to list, but I appreciate you asking. So our staking business is super strong, and yeah, I mean we like to support anything new in the DeFi space. As you mentioned, we just integrated Lightning. Pierre Rochard worked on that. It's a really great contributor to Bitcoin, and we're really proud to support connectivity to the network. As on-chain fees climb, using Lightning saves a lot of time and money. So we want to support all the different blockchains in the ecosystem in a way to where we're very, we want our users to have a great experience when they're transacting on-chain. So appreciate the question, thank you.
Oh yeah, so coming soon, let's go. We have time for one more. One quick one, no problem.
Thank you for sharing with us today. My name is Teresa Kennedy. I'm with the Black History DAO, and we're creating a decentralized autonomous organization for the preservation of Black history on the blockchain, and helping to onboard our historians and Griot into the metaverse. And we would really like to use Bitcoin for the layering of our tokenomics. Do you have any recommendations or suggestions on the best ways in which we can utilize the technology that you're building, or insight into what y'all have in the future that might be of use of us trying to build this economy or social coin on the Bitcoin layer, because we prefer to use that over any other?
Well, there's a lot of ground to cover there, and I'll try my best in 30 seconds. So, when building on top of Bitcoin, I would definitely recommend you talk to some engineers. I'm not an engineer, and so talk to some really smart protocol level engineers who understand the technical issues and the integration issues that you're going to have to go through. There's a lot of different ways you can build this. So there's a whole big surface area here on scope of like what you'd want to build. At a minimum, you could start in kind of like baby steps where you just accept Bitcoin and support the foundation that way. And this foundation could have a multi-sig address that controls that Bitcoin. So that could be your governance mechanism. So that would be like the basics, and there's a lot of other ways you can take that. So I appreciate you asking, and definitely recommend you talk to an expert about that.
Oh yeah, thank you for that, and thank you again, Dan, for coming up. I
Appreciate it.
Yes, great talking to you. Everybody give Dan a hand. Thank you.